a little girl. I asked my mother, what will I be? Will I be pretty? Will I be rich? Here's what she said to me. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. The future's not out. Hi, everyone. Oh, people are coming in. Bump, bump, bump. Kay said, hi, Lisa. Hearts, hearts, hearts to you too. Oh, nice. I love to see people that I know and even people I don't know. It's great fun. Here we go. Rosemary from Cincinnati, Tiffany. Good evening. Tennessee. Hi, Nathalie. We love our Nathalie. Her real name is Natalie, but because she has an H in the name, I always pronounce it with a TH for fun. From Granbury. I don't know where Granbury is, Nancy. I don't know that. Michigan?
Granbury, Connecticut?
Granbury, Connecticut, maybe? My husband's from Connecticut, so we're making an assumption that's what it could be. All righty. We see everyone joining in. Hi, Nancy. Nancy Spencer. I see. Michigan. So tonight we are going to talk about forthcoming surgery. I'm just reading what I put together. What you use when you feel beat up by sports and workouts. My husband knows that. He just joined Orange Theory and he comes back crawling up the stairs. And then I give him his Arnica. Are we about to have a baby? What remedy should we use for these kinds of conditions? And I've got lots more conditions. So those of you who know anything about homeopathy have already probably figured this out. This is, especially since we know we are in the A's, in the Materia Medica, it's Arnica. It's actually the first medicine that most people learn, and it's a great one. Everyone should own, I have the little laughter bubbles. Everyone needs to own Arnica Montana. I don't care if you know nothing about homeopathy, if you've never heard of homeopathy, if you've got a friend who knows nothing about homeopathy, the one remedy that you want to get them to learn about, to start with, is Arnica Montana. It is gorgeous. So I'm going to tell a couple stories because Arnica Montana has such a ubiquitous use that I've got lots of stories about it. The first one was that because it's such a common remedy and most people learn it first, my mother, when I was first learning homeopathy, remembered just Arnica Montana. It's all she remembered. Now, my mother has late stage Alzheimer's and she lives with us. We take care of her. And she's never had a really great remedy or memory. And so when something would go wrong, the first thing she thought of, no matter what it was, a gut problem, diarrhea, anxiety, insomnia, whatever it might be, she used Arnica Montana. And she had a kit because I bought her a kit. And my parents, especially when I was first learning homeopathy, lived right next door to us. Actually, we lived next door to them. They moved to that house first, and then my husband and I and our children moved in next door. And so she would just use Arnica for whatever ailed her. And so she actually came up with lots of ways to use Arnica that never occurred to me. And I never found it in the books. One of the ways was that my mother used to drink a lot of coffee. And she didn't know it, but we all kind of figured it out later, that it was what was the cause, most likely, of her insomnia. And she had insomnia since a very young woman. And she also drank a lot of coffee since a young woman. So it's very likely that that was the cause. But at any rate, when she couldn't sleep, she would take Arnica Montana 200. She just took it and she said it helped her sleep. We also found out that if she didn't take it and she was up all night because she forgot to or didn't think to do it or didn't want to do it, didn't want to get up or whatever, and the next day she felt beat up and exhausted by not having slept, kind of dragging through the day, she would take Arnica Montana. My mother's a great little prover. And that helped her. So I would feverishly write it in my notes. Here's my book. Look at the mess this book is in. I actually called a binder today. Look at this thing. It's falling apart. It's already been bound twice. Now this will have to be the third time. I'm having a hard time finding a binder in South Florida. Anyway, I would write it in my book under Arnica Montana. This is a Materia Medica. You should write it if you've got my Materia Medica. You should write it right there in the margins so that you've got some place to keep it. I write about Arnica Montana, but I don't know that I said exactly everything I'm going to be teaching you tonight. So you use it for when you can't sleep, when your child can't sleep, and especially if someone is kind of beat up, overworked, too many sports that day. I don't mean physically beat up in terms of actual injuries, although it's a great remedy for injuries, but for someone who's just used their body an awful lot. You use Arnica Montana 200, and you use it until the person feels better. Now, my mother would take Arnica Montana and fall right to sleep. I don't know, maybe 10 minutes, I think I remember her saying. She didn't need to take more than one dose, but should you need to, it wouldn't be a problem if you did. So Arnica Montana twice or once, and if in the middle of the night you're still not falling asleep, take another dose. You could use it in a 30 if that's all you've got, but I so much believe in using Arnica Montana in a 200. It works so beautifully in that potency. So own this remedy. It's great for fresh traumas, so broken bone, overstressing of muscles and tendons, ligaments, doing after gymnastics, after ice skating, after no matter what it is. Which brings me to a great little story. I actually wrote about it in my Materia Medica, that I had a pretty famous captain of the Buffalo hockey team, Sabres hockey team. His wife and children used to come to me regularly. And one time he drove them to my office. It's when I was meeting folks in my office. And I had never met him, but when he walked in, he looked really bad. It was the beginning of the season. I believe that's sometime in February or March, probably March. And he looked pale and actually almost green. And he walked in looking like he was depressed or really sick. So I asked him, I met him, and I said, "Hi, how are you doing?" He says, "Oh, not so good." And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, we just started the season, and because he's captain, he's older than all the other teammates, and he's still required to work out as vigorously and rigorously as all the other teammates, and it really beat him up. And he was feeling nauseous and weak, shaky, breathless. And anytime we see anything worse after an exertion, a great exertion, or even a minimal exertion, but anytime someone feels sick in any sort after an exertion, we give them Arnica Montana. Now, I can't administer homeopathic medicines. I'm not a pharmacist. I'm not a physician. So, but I encouraged his wife to give him a dose of Arnica Montana. In that case, we gave him 1 m. And I think a 200 would have worked as well, or would have worked, but I think a 1 m worked even more profoundly. I offered him, while I was taking his wife and children's cases, I offered him to lay down. I had a nice place to lay down in my office. He said, no, I'm going into the car. I feel really nauseous, and I don't want to be nauseous in your home. So I'm going to go out in the car. And he laid down, and he came back after about 45 minutes. And he said, "Holy," and I won't say the words he said, "what was that stuff? I can't believe how great I feel." His color had returned. He had a sparkle in his eye. You could see his whole demeanor had completely changed in 45 minutes. He said, "I don't know what that stuff is, but whatever it is, honey, make sure we've got a good amount of it." And he shared it. He told many of his fellow players, and I worked with many Sabres hockey team members because of that simple incident. Many of them came to me for their shoulder injuries, surgical, post-surgical, pre-surgical, etc., see if they could get away with not having surgery. And in some cases, it was we eliminated some surgical procedures with homeopathy, and others it was inevitable. So what do you suppose we use for surgery then? leads us right into this story, and that is Arnica montana 200C is an excellent medicine for before surgery and after surgery. So this is the way we use it. We use Arnica montana the night before the surgery, the morning of the surgery, just before being wheeled out on the gurney, if you have that opportunity, and then the moment that you can get to the person, the family member, in the ICU or recovery room, wherever they end up. And it's administered every few hours after that. So it's night, morning of, just before the surgery, and as soon as you can get to the person after the surgery. And then it's used every few hours for pain and helping to eliminate the analgesic, but generally it's for pain and bruising and bleeding and hematomas and clotting, etc. If the blood is too thin, it corrects it. It thickens it. If it's too viscous, it corrects it. It can make it thinner. It is Arnica montana, like all homeopathic medicines, doesn't manipulate, it corrects. So it's the perfect medicine for when we've had surgery. Then it can be used every 3 hours after the surgery. Every 6 hours, you open it up more infrequently as the person improves, and keep opening it up. And then maybe 3-4 times a day or twice a day for days after. And I will bet that person will recover much more quickly and surprise the doctor. And the doctor will feel very proud that he was such a great doctor that the person did not take 6 weeks to recover, but instead half that time. So remember that medicine for that reason. It's also a great medicine for soft tissue injuries, injuries to the thighs, injuries to the breasts. After an automobile accident, if a woman is wearing a seatbelt and her body jams into the seatbelt, there can be a lot of breast pain and even ecchymosis. And so what we do is we use Arnica montana for that 200C, especially if there's pain. Now, it's not the only medicine we use for that. And I want you to know that I don't speak in absolutes here. I'm giving you the number one remedy, but there are others that we can consider. So we can also consider in that situation Bellus perennis. But Arnica montana is very, very close to number one. I had a case of a woman who came to me many years ago and said she had breast pain that was stimulated. She was convinced that it was from a mammogram. She had a mammogram. She had no problems with breast pain. She had a mammogram, and one breast became very sore, and it was the breast that she felt had been a little bit too, mashed, I guess, had been traumatized by a mammogram. It hurt right then and there. It hurt all that day, the next day, and it never went away. And it had been years prior. I think it was something like 3 or 4 years after that mammogram, that breast remained painful. So what I'm teaching you is that Arnica montana is great for a recent injury, such as what happened to the Sabres hockey team captain. He had just been made sick by overusing his body the day before. It could happen from just having had surgery a few hours earlier. It can also be used for an injury that occurred years ago. If you know that that is the cause, now don't make an assumption. It's always best to know what we're dealing with. We want to know, if possible, the true etiology. So we can use this medicine specifically for after something that has been traumatized that still all this time remains a problem. Interesting. Within 3 days, that pain went away. She came back to me ecstatic, coming to me with other conditions, dry skin and that kind of thing. We didn't have to think about the breast pain that she had because it was completely gone. And I believe it was a long time ago, but I know that it was an Arnica 200. I don't remember how frequently I used it because in those days I did not use remedies as frequently as I do now. The repetition was not as grand. But probably we used it a couple times a day for several days. But within a few days, the pain was gone permanently. She had, by the way, had been to many doctors, and none of them knew what to do. They really, to be honest, one of them did not believe that that was the cause, that it couldn't have been from a mammogram. But she was convinced. And she always came with her husband. He said, yes, it was from the mammogram. That day was really painful for her, and it never went away. All right. Now, how about injuries of another sort? How about hard of hearing or tinnitus that results from having been at a concert or having been around an event where there was a lot of noise, a cannon shooting? And from that time forward, we have basically an injury of sorts in which the ears are either painful, that we've lost hearing, or even partial hearing, excuse me, or tinnitus. That we always start with Arnica montana, 200C. And even if that happened years ago, and from that time forward, we've had this problem, we use Arnica montana. We can use it the day after, the night before. You went to a concert, it's very loud. The next day, your ears are ringing. You're saying, what to your husband? Hello, who's there? And you can't hear so well. That's a good time to start, but it doesn't have to be right then and there. It can be long after. I was told about a story, and so I don't have personal experience with this, but when I first started to study homeopathy, and I hope I get this story right, because if anyone happens to know it, I hope that I don't mangle it. But one of the stories I learned, and this was back in the 80s, there were a group of homeopaths who were just learning homeopathy in the 70s, I believe. They were, they were a group of doctors, medical doctors, conventional medical doctors, who had just learned a little bit about homeopathy and were interested in studying it. And what they decided to do was to study, of course, the first remedy first and the second remedy second. And usually, as I said, everyone learns Arnica montana first. One of the doctors was blind. He had been in an automobile accident with his family. And as I recall, his family actually died in the accident, and he managed to survive, but he was rendered blind from the accident. But he still was practicing. I don't know how he was doing that, but he was practicing. And they learned in the class that blindness as a result of a head injury can be sometimes remedied by Arnica montana in a high potency. Now, I don't know what potency they gave him that night, but after that first class, they all got together and said, hey, what have we got to lose? Why don't you take this? And they gave him the medicine, the homeopathic Arnica montana. My guess, it was probably a high potency, probably higher potency, a 1M. And when he woke up in the middle of the night, he noticed that it was 3 a.m. Now, how did he notice it was 3 a.m? Some of his sight had returned. Now, I don't know if that's a folk tale. I don't know if it's a real story, but I'm telling you anyway, because if this story is correct, if it's not correct, I'm telling you because if there is a head injury, we almost always think of Arnica montana first. It's not the only medicine. I'm going to tell you again, it's not the only one. We have Natrum sulfuricum that is great for head injuries. We have Cicuta virosa. We have, I'm trying to think of some others, aconitum, cuprum metallicum. Those are all great remedies for head injuries, and depending on how they present. But Arnica montana is the first one we think of. And so whether the story is true or not, I want you to remember it. It's such a dramatic story that it might help you remember that anytime there's a head injury, we always think of that, even if it's years later. The closer it is to the condition, to the onslaught of the injury, certainly the better, but it can happen even years later. I have lots of stories about Arnica montana. I don't want to go into too many of them, but it's also used for arthritic flares. So does it matter if it's osteoarthritis or if it's rheumatoid arthritis? It's arthritis. Arnica montana is great for that. It can be a 200 potency. I often use Arnica montana along with Symphytum, Symphytum, Symphytum 200. Sometimes I use it all by itself, and especially injuries or arthritis in the knee or knees. Arnica is very specific for arthritis in the knees or injuries to the knees. Now, it doesn't mean it can't be used in other areas, but arthritis and injuries to the knees, it is absolutely a number one. It's also great for a goose egg. I've seen that many times in my children. My mother took a spill several months ago, and it was the first time I ever saw a real goose egg. It was on the side of my mother's head. It looked not like a chicken egg, not like a quail egg, a goose. This thing was huge, and she looked distorted. It looked like she was a unicorn with a horn that came off the wrong side. It was gargantuan, and we immediately started administering it to her, and she never had any disquieting. She was never had any pain that we could see. She was actually pretty fine. And the goose egg went down in a few days for her, but especially for her because my mother has vascular issues. It took a little bit longer than what I would expect to occur if it were a child. All righty. Arnica montana for birthing. When you go into labor, ladies, when your daughters and your daughter-in-laws go into labor, start with Arnica montana 200C. It helps with the pain. It helps loosen things up. It calms the mom down. It helps with that beat up feeling afterwards. You can give it every 3 hours during labor. After the birth, you give it immediately after birth, and the mother will not have that bruised feeling. Sometimes moms can feel bruised because the head is hitting so hard, especially if the mother is given Pitocin. By all means, you want to give Arnica montana because the head is hitting hard against the os, and it's an unnatural thing, and it can be very, very painful afterwards. I used Arnica montana for all 3 of my births, but my first one I knew enough to use, thank goodness. And as soon as I gave birth, literally, we went right home. And that one was a hospital birth. I had home births subsequently, but we went immediately home, and I was so motivated and so rejuvenated. And I don't know if it was the Arnica or if it was just the joy of giving birth to my baby, that I got up and started cooking, and I was doing laundry, and my family was saying, would you just sit down? It keeps the bleeding from going over the top. It's great for, as I said, clotting if it needs to be clotted, and lightening the viscosity of the blood if that needs to be done. All righty. What else did I want to tell you about this incredible medicine? It grows in the Alps. It's a little flower. So it's been used for centuries. I said hearing loss. Oh, hearing loss after an injury, I said. But you know what another injury is? Meningitis. If someone has had meningitis and they've had a hearing loss, if there's an illness, a severe flu, and there's a hearing loss, if there is because even though it's not an actual physical injury that's a trauma to the skull or the back or anything like that, it's still a very important remedy if there's hearing loss after an event, after a specific, where you can actually say, here's the event and here's the hearing loss. Here's the event and here's the tinnitus. Can be very, very useful. Doesn't mean we have to stop there. If there's a little bit of improvement, then we would continue a little bit further. If there's a lot of improvement, we still continue with it. If there's no improvement after a short period of time, then we put that aside and say, well, look, we've done the best we can with the trauma aspect of this case. Now we go into something else. And for hearing loss, you can certainly look at my blog. I've got some information on that. Arnica montana. Let's go to low potency. How about a 3X? I wrote an article years ago titled My Dad and the Dead Cardiologist. If you just key that in to your browser, I'm sure you'll find it. And I talk about using Arnica montana 3X daily. I used it as a substitute for aspirin for my father. My father had been taking aspirin, baby aspirin, as per his cardiologists. And if you read my story, you'll see one of the reasons why we decided to eliminate the use of that aspirin. But my father was getting buzzing in his ears, and that is a side effect, by the way, of aspirin, in case you don't know that. And he was getting burning in the stomach. So we were worried about him getting ulcers, for goodness sakes. Now, my father had a heart condition. Through the years, he had a couple different kinds of heart conditions, one just laid on top of the other. But I had learned from Dr. Ramakrishnan in India, when I had studied with him in Toronto many years ago, that he used Arnica montana 3X twice daily as a substitute for aspirin. And so that's what we did. We substituted Arnica montana 3X for aspirin. And my father stayed with Arnica for, I want to say, I'm just taking a guess, 18 years maybe. Until he passed away a year and a half ago. So it did him a lot of good. My father did indeed pass away from a heart condition, but he was in his 91st year. So I feel as though I had him not long enough, but still had him for a good amount of time. And he trusted it completely. He felt as though it really made a big difference in his life because he could stop the aspirin. All right, let's see. I said an antidote to insomnia. Here's something interesting. After an injury, the person often, especially a head injury, the person often does not recognize how injured they are. And they say, I'm fine. Really, I'm just fine. Just leave me alone. When I was in high school, I had a friend who was in a motorcycle accident. In those days, people did not wear helmets. And he went flying over the handlebars of the motorcycle and landed right in the back of a car. And I was called because he was a dear friend and asked if I would go to the emergency room. I was just a teenager. I knew nothing about homeopathy, certainly. But I was called in just to give him support. And when I went into the hospital to see him, his face was all swollen, his lips were swollen, and he was backing himself up into a corner. He was standing, backing up into the corner, and wouldn't let anyone near him. He did not really cognitively recognize me. And he said, no, get away. And he was very frightened. That is a response that is a natural response when someone needs Arnica montana. Not in any situation, but in a situation where there's been a severe injury, especially a head injury. So that's something to remember. If you hear someone say, no, I'm just fine, and it turns out that their ankle is broken or their femur's been cracked in two places, it's time to start administering Arnica montana. Let's see if we've missed anything else. Let's see if we have any questions. Perry, you see any questions?
Amanda Green.
Amanda, how far down is Amanda?
Pretty far down.
Pretty far down. Amanda, here we go. Amanda, would you substitute Arnica 3X as a substitute for preventing miscarriage? A friend's doctor prescribed aspirin daily to maintain pregnancy. It's not my first remedy. I always think of the calcarea remedies. So calc carb 30 twice a day. And that is used frequently to protect pregnancies. So I wouldn't use Arnica to protect I'm not going to tell this person not to do what her doctor said, but aspirin can cause hemorrhaging. And the last thing you want to do is hemorrhage when you're pregnant, when you're more likely to hemorrhage, especially during the labor. Do you see any others? Would you use this if you are taking low dose ASA, if you're taking it because of DVT? There are other remedies that are better for deep vein thrombosis, but Arnica is certainly one of them to be considered. Absolutely. Is Arnica good for inducing overdue pregnancy? No, it's not the one that I would think of. I think of caulifilum, but if you're particularly interested, you might want to go to my course titled Feminopathy, because I do talk about pregnancy, and there's a lot more about pregnancy in that. Also, I talk about pregnancy pretty much in Survivalist Guide to Homeopathy as well. All right. Is it okay for stuttering after an injury? I would say any injury I would think of Arnica Montana. But remember when I said that Arnica Montana is specific, it's the first one we think of, but we can for a head injury, but we could also use Cicuta verosa, Natrum sulfuricum, Cuprum metallicum. I know we do have to get going, don't we? Cuprum metallicum is the remedy that we use for stuttering, and it just so happens to be the medicine that we use for head injuries. So I might use Arnica Montana and then later use Cuprum metallicum. So folks, I have to dash off because at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, which is exactly the time now, I go to my study group. And if you're not part of a study group, you might want to seriously consider joining one. Gateway to Homeopathy. Go to my front page. It's a fabulous way to meet others, to be involved. And then at the end of the 8-week session, or sometimes after a 4-week session, folks call me in after they've been studying for a while, and they ask me questions, and we've got one scheduled tonight and several times this week. So that's what we've done tonight. Arnica Montana. Keep it in your purse. Make sure you own it. Give it to your friends who are pregnant. Make sure you teach your children how to use it. Arnica Montana. And so with that, folks, God bless. Have a great week. Love you all. Bye.